It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I heard a really weird broadcast over the radio 2 weeks ago from a station that shouldn't exist. After finding it, I wish I never had. By Corpse Child. Okay, to begin, you need to know that I like to spend time outside at night time listening to the radio. Never usually anything specific, just whatever happens to be on. To answer your question as to why, well, I guess it's just something I'd always found comforting. Whether it's going for a drive in my car, to nowhere really in particular, or just sitting on my back deck, staring at the night sky, I'd usually have some kind of FM radio playing in the background. Well, looking back, I'd have to say the habit started back when I was about 6 or 7, and my dad would always sit in the backyard in front of a small fire he'd built, listening to the radio, usually to the news or country. He said it was a way of feeling connected from a distance. He'd sit for hours at a time, too, sometimes not coming back inside till sunrise. A few times I'd try to join him by the fire, but would inevitably get bored and just go back inside and watch cartoons. Funny enough, though, as I get older, I'd end up picking up the same habit. Like father, like son, I guess. In high school, me and my buddies would often go on nighttime drives down roads neither of us knew, even getting lost a few times, just blasting the radio on a station that played metal music. Like I said, I never really grew out of this habit. And when my old man passed away in my senior year, I inherited his old radio. From then to the present, I spent hours once the sun set just sitting in the backyard, listening to different stations, just like he used to. It was the same that night, a couple of weeks ago, just surfing through different stations until I finally settled on 96.7 FM, a rock music station. For a while everything was going just fine, just me, the music, and the quiet nights, until in the middle of Dream On, the radio started fading out to static. It was just a small change at first, basically just a light static buzz with the music fading a little in its volume. Then, though, I noticed the static essentially swallow the other sounds from the radio until it was nothing but white noise. Oh, what the hell? I started trying to tap it to try and maybe knock the signal back. When that didn't seem to work, I just started fooling with the antenna, thinking maybe it needed to be readjusted, figuring I must have knocked it out of range without noticing. Well, this wasn't working either. Ah, great, I thought, annoyed, turning the knob to another station. It had to be during one of my favorite songs, too. Well, the next station came through. From the sound of it, it was one of those mainstream hip-hop stations I couldn't stand, so I flipped again to one of a comedy show. I decided I'd listen to this for a while before finally heading in for the night and off to bed. Well, I did have to work in the morning. Well, just like 96.7, everything was fine until I started hearing the static again. And just like before, it ended up dominating the rest of the sounds coming from the radio. Oh, what's going on with this thing? I wondered, tapping it on the sides again. I tried tuning to all of the other different stations, all of them being drowned out in clouds of interference. I even bent the antenna about 5 different ways, almost breaking the damn thing in frustration, trying to get a clear signal. Nothing. Every station static. All except for one, that is. That one I said was a hip-hop station. That was the only one that seemed to actually come in clearly. Well, sort of. Now, maybe I should specify. I said it was a hip-hop music station, and that's not entirely accurate. It was more of a mixed droning noise with synthesized sounds passing through at certain points. Honestly, I didn't think of that in of itself was that weird. I mean, again, just figuring it was some new, quote-unquote, trendy type of music kids were into these days. Well, that is, until I heard something else coming from the radio as well. Listening closer, I could hear some sort of garbled voice blended amid the droning. It sounded mechanical, sounding like someone was speaking with one of those artificial voice boxes. Well, because of this, I couldn't tell you a word of what was being said. I did notice, though, the sound of different letters, like it was trying to form words, maybe in a different language or something. And with this, I figured maybe it was a foreign broadcast, a station from another country, maybe. Oh, I wonder how they'd managed to broadcast all the way out here, deep in the south, you know. In any case, I tried one more time to switch the stations before saying, screw it, and heading back in for the night. Figuring whatever it was just a one-time deal, a freak occurrence, and I'd be able to listen to the radio like normal again tomorrow, right? Well, that idea died when I went outside the next morning, realizing I'd left it out there by accident, and apparently still turned on, and found that it was playing that weird station. Well, the first thing to go through my mind, of course, was, how was it still playing? The battery should have given out long before then, given how much I use it, and it had been at least a couple of months since the last time I'd actually changed them. And then there was the question of what this station even was. What was it even playing? Now, like I said, it wasn't exactly what I call music. And what was it saying, or trying to say? I tried to flip the stations again. Nothing. Static fuzz all around. Finally realizing I had to head out for work, I took out the batteries and set the radio on the counter, deciding I'd replace them when I got home. That'll fix it, I thought. At work, one of my co-workers, Porter, had his radio playing Sirius XM while we worked, repairing the transmission in an SUV someone had brought in. I wondered if maybe he'd heard it as well, that weird-ass station. When I asked him, though, it was obvious he didn't have a clue what the hell I was talking about. All I listened to is this, he said, pointing to his radio. Well, last night, I was outside listening to my radio when this weird station started playing. All the other stations weren't coming through anymore. He asked me what kind of music it was playing, to which I described as best I could what it was like. I asked him, being a lot more into modern music trends than I was, as well as being an aspiring musician, constantly showing off his EDM tracks on SoundCloud, if he knew what kind of music it was, and if maybe he knew what stations might play it. Still, it was obvious he didn't know. He told me that it sort of sounded like some kind of lo-fi or synthwave station. Of course, I had to ask him what the hell that was. Yeah, I'm out of touch, I know. He then pulled up YouTube and showed me something called 24/7 synthwave radio. Admittedly, listening to it for a moment, it did sound somewhat similar to what I was hearing the previous night, but it still didn't quite match. Music I was hearing from Porter's phone was clear and obviously just music, unlike what I'd heard from the radio, which sounded more like this being put through a blender on its highest setting with a bunch of nails before then mixing it with a droning noise. Not to mention that this still didn't answer the other question. What station was the one playing it, and why and how were all the other stations not working? I gave this no further thought, though, given that it was clear that Porter didn't seem to know, and, like I said earlier, I figured a change of batteries would solve the problem anyway. What did it matter what station it was, or how it was playing, right? On the way home, I was driving to the Walgreens to grab some batteries, blasting my music as usual, when I started hearing it. It was starting to fade into a static cloud. It was a small change at first, just like the radio in the backyard. And because of this, I didn't really notice at first. Plus, it was cloudy out, so I figured maybe that was screwing with the signal. Of course, soon the music was lost completely to the static. I started flipping around the stations, but, well, you guessed it, all of them were gone. Nothing but a cloud of interference. Damn, is the weather really that bad? Oh, come on, there's got to be one station that... I stopped when I started hearing something from the radio. It sounded like some retro synth music, similar to what I'd heard from Porter's phone, though, again, not nearly as polished or clean with its sound. This confused me at first. What? The car, too? I looked at the radio to see the station labeled as 66.69 FUTR FM, Or at least that's what it looked like it was reading. That was something else that confused me, seeing that the digits were sort of jumbled, looking half completed. You know, the way you'd see in an old digital clock that was getting worn out, even though my car's model is actually only from last year. Well, anyway, having the same problem I was with the radio, not being able to play any other stations except for this one, I decided to just cut the radio off and pick up the batteries. Admittedly, a small part of me did wonder if it was even worth it to bother with new radio batteries, given that apparently whatever this broadcast wasn't just isolated to my radio. After picking up the batteries, I headed home where, after changing them, I turned the radio on and started station surfing. Well, as I'd hoped, they all played normally. So then, what the hell was that station? I wondered. That led me to try Google searching for 66.69 Future FM. This turned out to lead to a dead end, though. Next, I tried searching for synthwave radio stations, which led to a few results, each of them with a few recorded tracks, as well as some live recordings of their broadcasts through YouTube. I clicked on them, but realized none of them matched. None of them were what I was hearing through the radios, at least not by themselves. You see, that's when I realized that the strange music from the radios was actually a weird sort of blend of every one of these stations, with a low-pitched droning as a sort of foundation or background noise for it. That night I'd go through my typical nighttime ritual of listening to the radio in the backyard, now with fresh batteries. This time, though, I was waiting, ready, hoping to catch the broadcast again. I thought maybe a further listen might shed a bit of light on what exactly it was, and maybe even where it was from. Just like the night before, everything was normal for a while. Hours started ticking by, with the night getting later and later, and still nothing seemed to be happening with the radio. Come on, I thought impatiently. It's getting to be about 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was about to give it up, figuring maybe it really was just a fluke after all, when it started happening again. I was listening to a late-night talk show when I heard it started fading in and out of the signal, and, just as I'd hoped, all other stations went down with it. I turned until hitting the only station that wasn't static, 66.69 Future FM, before leaning in close to try and listen. And at first, it just seemed to play the same constant droning synth loop I'd heard before. Then, I finally heard the weird, distorted voice from before. It sounded as garbled and damn near incomprehensible as last time. This time, concentrating as hard as I possibly could, even holding the damn thing straight up to my ear, which left them ringing afterwards, I could hear the deep-toned robo-voice start listing what sounded like numbers and a mix of letters. To the best I can remember, here's what I heard. 1000 X-ray noliteru. Haset aledudet 35. Sued aledudet 64. And then I heard this. Not going, hear me? Me at first, the eternal draws. 'Tis only to gag me. Ex me so of hair. After that, it went back to the synth music. I sat listening for a while longer, hoping to maybe catch it again, that weird voice speaking once more. Unfortunately, though, I just couldn't hold out long enough, and I ended up falling asleep before I'd hear another message, well, if there was one. This morning I woke up in my yard chair to find the radio still playing that synth music. I heard it play for another 3 to 5 minutes before it seemed to get swallowed by interference. After this, I turned to find the other stations working again like they were supposed to. After mentally kicking myself for falling asleep while trying to listen, I tried to think again about what I'd heard, or rather, what I thought I'd heard. What was that? What the hell was he saying? Hell, who was it that was even speaking to begin with? Where in God's name was it coming from? It was just a few hours later that day, though, that I heard the broadcast again. This time I was able to use my phone to record the parts of the voice speaking. I noticed too that it seemed louder than before. It sounded more emphasized as well, like whoever it was that was speaking was shouting into the microphone, like they were scared almost. But at first it was more or less the same message as last night.
1,000 degrees, no altitude. Set altitude at 35. Sweat altitude at 64. You read me trapped the temperatures. Takes me to off here.
And then, about 15 minutes later, I heard this being shouted.
Take me though, down on here. I do not take me here. It hurts. It's hurting me. Please, take me out.
This was when I realized that the messages seemed to actually repeat. For about another 2 hours or so, it cycled in a constant loop, starting with the first one, with the shouting one following it about half an hour or so later. Of course, being as disjointed and jumbled as it was, I couldn't make heads or tails out of a damn bit of that. I called my old buddy Reggie over to try and see if maybe he could tell me anything about it. He worked at a TV station, so I figured if anyone might have a clue, he might. After listening to it, though, Reggie said he'd never seen or heard of anything like this before. I asked him if he knew of any other stations that played the weird synth music, but he knew nothing about that either.
The only places I know that plays anything like that would be YouTube or maybe Spotify, he told me.
When I asked him about the messages, what was being said, he replied that he too couldn't make much of it either. He told me that he could try looking into it later on that night. I asked if he'd be able to bunk over, maybe bring his equipment over to my place, and we'd be able to look into it together. He declined though.
I have work tomorrow, plus I'd need to take this into the studio anyway for proper examination.
He had a point, so I decided to let him take it home with him, asking him to listen to it and let me know if something new comes up. He agreed before leaving, taking the radio with him. I didn't hear from him again until 2 days later. In that time I hadn't heard the broadcast again, something that I attribute to the fact that I hadn't actually been listening to the radio, not even in the car, not having gone anywhere. So when he did get back to me over the phone, it was to more or less tell me he'd come up empty-handed as far as where the broadcast was actually coming from. He did, however, apparently manage to clean up a bit of the warped speech and tell me what was being said. That's when things would begin taking a sharp turn left. This is the translation he sent me.
Can you hear me? I'm trapped in between worlds. It's hurting me. Get me out of here.
Well, needless to say, I found this extremely unnerving. Who was this? Where were they? What were they talking about? Why did he seem so hysterical? What does he mean by trapped in between worlds? I asked Reggie if he was absolutely sure that was what was actually being said through the broadcast. He replied by sending me a recorded fragment of the broadcast, followed by an audio translation. Listening to them both side by side, sure as hell he was right. That really was what was being said. He told me this was likely a pirated signal, despite the fact he still didn't know why he couldn't pin the source.
Every pirate signal's come from somewhere, he told me.
But, for whatever reason, this one seems to be coming from nowhere.
How? I asked.
Beats the hell out of me. Like I've been saying, I've never heard anything at all like this before. Well, does the voice sound at all familiar? Maybe if you found a match for...
Not likely, he interrupted, laughing sarcastically. The voice is too distorted. It's honestly everything I could do to put the words together the way I did. Hell, the only reason I was able to do that much was because I recognized bits and pieces of the words and found a way to isolate them from the background noise.
Oh, I said, defeated. Well, was there anything else? Weren't there numbers, too? Yeah, I think so, actually. Hold on. I could hear him shuffle papers around. Yeah, here we go. Got a piece of paper and pen handy? He then went on to tell me the coordinates for 1000 degrees longitude, 35 degrees east latitude, 64 degrees west. After that I thanked him before hanging up. For a while I sat, thinking, wondering what was going on. What was this message? The station, the voice, all of it. What actually was it? What did any of it mean? Not only that, but why was I the one hearing it? I know that's a bit of a dramatic question to ask, but still, why was I the one that kept catching the broadcasts, given that no one else seemed to even know what the hell I was talking about? What was he afraid of? That's when I started wondering what he meant by, "It's after me." What was after him? Where did it come from? Between worlds, maybe, but then still, what did that mean? The biggest question, though, is what would happen if I decided to investigate further? Admittedly, I was quite intimidated by now. The bizarre nature of it all, coupled with a mysterious and quite ominous message, was really starting to get to me by that point. Disturbed or not, though, it was clear to me I wasn't going to get any peace of mind from this until I got some answers. The problem then was how? How was I supposed to find the meaning behind the messages from a radio station that, by rights, basically doesn't exist? Where would I go to even start? Well, for that, I decided to look into the coordinates Reggie had given me. Using Google Earth, I managed to pinpoint a location that actually wasn't too far away from me. It was a spot about 30 miles outside my town, about 2.5 to 3 hours away from where I lived. The thing is, at least from what I've been led most of my life to believe, there wasn't anything out in that area for at least another 10 or so miles past that point. And according to Google Maps, this was indeed the case, that whole area being essentially barren. So then, what the hell was out there? And how was it there if it wasn't showing up on the map? I tried multiple times to zoom in on the area. Each time resulted with the same conclusion, though. There was nothing there. I then texted Reggie, asking if he'd be willing to look into it. About 20 minutes went by before he responded with the same answer. I asked him if he was sure, if it weren't possible that somebody was sending out a pirate signal. "Not likely. Trust me, unless I'm mistaken, in order to hijack main airways like this, they'd need some sort of studio setup. Some kind of place of operations with at least some basic radio equipment." With that, I was stumped once again. With no leads, no clues, no evidence, and frankly no real will to keep pushing at the matter, I decided to shut everything down and call it a night. That is, until late that night when, as I was about to go to sleep, my phone started ringing off the hook with a call from Reggie. I was cut off before I could even finish. "Dude, something's going on," he shouted excitedly into the phone. "What do you mean?" "Those coordinates. You know how there was nothing there earlier?" "Yeah, why?" "Look at them now." I booted the computer back up and pulled up Google Earth again, inputting the coordinates. Sure enough, zooming in close, there it was. A small, run-down-looking sort of shack with a satellite on the roof. "Hey, you see it?" I didn't answer at first. I was speechless. I had to rub my eyes and even slap myself to make sure I was actually awake and seeing this. Finally, I managed to stammer out, "Yeah, but how?" "I know, right?" he shouted, obviously geeking out about this. "They just showed up like a minute ago when the station started playing again on the radio. When I looked again on Google Earth, there it was." "Wait, what do you mean it just appeared?" "Exactly what I said, man. Just a minute ago, it wasn't there, but as soon as the station starts playing on the radio, abra-fucking-cadabra, there it is." He cackled like he was Dr. Frankenstein. Well, I wasn't as ecstatic about this. Instead, I was just lost. If I wasn't looking right at it myself in that moment, I'd have told him that he needed to quit smoking whatever he was on. Of course, that didn't at all explain how this was even possible. In fact, this obviously created a whole new generation of questions, one that I wasn't certain I had any real means to answer. Hell, at this point, do I even really want to know? That was another thing. I still couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was wasn't something I had any business screwing around with. I mean, when it came to things like this, things that shouldn't be possible like this, especially in this situation where everything was just so ominous, it typically wasn't a good idea to go tumbling down the rabbit hole, right? At the same time, though, I just couldn't seem to let it go. I just had to know, danger or not. Oh God, hold up. What the hell? I was instantly brought back from my thoughts into reality. Where is it? What happened? I asked. Ironically enough, as soon as I asked, I actually saw it myself. The station wasn't on the screen anymore. How in the hell? On the other end, I could hear the frantic clacking of his keyboard, followed by the slamming of his fist on the desk and him shouting, "Ah, shit, it's gone. The station's disappeared." Wait, calm down. What happened? I mean, what do you mean by disappeared? Exactly what I said, dude. It's fucking vanished. You see it? Yeah, I'm looking at it. What happened? Where did it go? Hell if I know. I mean, you saw it too, right? It was just there, wasn't it? Yeah, I saw that. Where is it now? I don't know. 1 minute it's there while the radio was playing, and now it's... Hey, wait a minute. Say that again. What? It was there a minute ago? No. The other part about the radio. What about it? Gears were starting to turn in my brain now. Hey, didn't you say that you saw it appear when the radio started playing the broadcast again? Yeah, why? How about now? Is it still playing? For a second, it was silent before he replied that it wasn't. Reg, hate to sound like a nerd like you here, but don't you suppose the broadcast may have had something to do with the station being there? Holy shit, he replied, realization flooding into his voice. Dude, how did I not think of that? Yeah, I think you're right. What about the broadcast? Did it change at all? Maybe say anything different? No, not that I'm aware of. Just the same shit from before. Why? What do you plan to do here? I thought for a moment before finally settling on a decision. Tomorrow afternoon, I declared, you and me, we'll meet up out there and see it for ourselves. Finally put this whole damn thing to bed. Though I said this with confidence, the truth was I wasn't feeling confident much at all. Either way, though, I was ready to be done with all of this, and I'd said it now, so no sense in trying to back out. 12 o'clock the next afternoon, I made the trek out to the area, arriving at about 2:45, with Reggie arriving about an hour later. Once there, we just sat and waited for nightfall. That day went by slowly, seeming like night wasn't going to come at all, and, by extension, neither would the broadcast. Eventually, though, the sun went down, and just a few hours later, the radio started going through its motions of fuzzing up every station with static, until only the one, 66.69 Future FM, was functional. Well, just as I'd hoped too, well, at least back then, the broadcast started playing, and we saw the station begin to appear. I remember how Reggie and I looked when we saw this. We were astonished, we were amazed, we were horrified even, or at least I was. Sweet mother of frickin' God, I heard him whisper, his mouth still hanging slack. The station continued to fade into existence right in front of us, while the music from the radio actually got louder and louder. Finally, it fully materialized, and the sounds were now near deafening. And that's when we heard the message again, this time booming. I was about to switch it off when Reggie stopped me. "Oh, if we stop it now, it might disappear again." He then waved over toward the building. "Right, come on, let's see what's inside." I stepped forward very slowly. I could feel my legs shaking with every step. Behind me, I could hear from the radio, "Can't either go out of here. Don't want to be here. It hurts. Raging hurt. This hurting me. Please get me out." The hell is he saying? I met Reggie at the front door. Well, I could tell, despite his excited demeanor before, that he too was feeling anxious from the way he was slowly, shakily reaching out to grab the doorknob. Neither of us knew what would happen, if anything at all. Honestly, I was almost half expecting his hand would pass right through it, like it was a hologram or something. Instead, he grasped the knob tight and began jiggling it. It seemed to take every bit of effort before it finally creaked open inwards. Inside was completely dark, somehow even standing out in the pitch black of the night, as well as being dead silent. I took out my phone and began trying to use the flashlight on the camera to look around. To no use. My light might as well have been a small lit match trying to light up the inside of a cave. "Hello?" I called into the darkness. Nothing replied from within. Reggie tried calling out. Well, that too resulted in silence. Reggie made his way inside then. Almost instantly, his body was swallowed by the darkness within. "Reggie!" I called out, reaching out to him. "Reggie!" I retracted my hand, however, when I felt something wet push back against it. "What the?" I reached out again to the opening, and that's when I noticed it wasn't actually an open space in the doorway. Whatever it was like felt like I was touching a gel mold, wet and flexible and malleable. What is this stuff? I wondered, now beyond disbelief. Hell, what even is this place? "Reggie!" I called out again. There was no answer. I stepped closer and cut my hands around my mouth and shouted, "Reggie, you there?" Still nothing. I was actually about to try going in after him when I noticed something shifting with the radio, causing me to stop and look back to it. The speech started to jumble, another voice seeming to integrate with the original. The background droning noise also began distorting, fluctuating back and forth between high and low pitches. The new voice began to overpower the old one, and it started to grow distant. And then I watched the gelatinous mass in the doorway in front of me begin wriggling, undulating, and pulsing violently. The new voice was now loudly repeating the message, while the old one was now faded away completely. That's when something big was hurled out of the dark doorway straight into me, knocking me over. Picking myself up, I watched as what looked like a haggard, raggedy-looking man was scrambling to his feet. He was tall and looked like he'd been starved to near death, with a long, unkempt beard and hair that was hanging past his shoulders. His clothes looked old and worn out, even seeing more than a few holes in various places. "I'm out," he said, breathing heavily. "He did it. Holy sweet Jesus, I'm free. I'm finally free." "Who the hell are you?" I shouted, alarmed. "Who are you? And where's Reggie?" He looked at me, smiling joyfully. His eyes were wide like an animal, with red veins spread all across them, looking like tiny tree roots. "He set me free," he whispered eagerly. "What? What do you mean? Free from what?" He pointed to the station. "From there." I looked over to the opening again. It was calm again, dark and empty. God, I've been stuck in there for years. But I'm out now. I'm finally out. Finally free. He started cackling again. "What happened in there?" I asked, snapping his attention back to me. Oh, years back. I heard the message from the radio when I found this place. I went inside and it took me, forced me to keep playing the broadcast. I let the other one go, the one before me. He cackled like a lunatic before adding, now I've finally been let go, and he's taken my place. I'm free. Who did? He looked at me for a second, puzzled. Who's it? Why was it forcing you to keep playing the broadcast? His face drained of color almost immediately, his look of glee falling into one of cold terror. He pointed to the station again. It don't got a name. It's pure evil. Likes to see us suffer. That's why it makes us keep playing the broadcast, see? He stopped, shuddering, his body quivering almost as violently as the gelatin mass in the doorway a few seconds ago. It's all just a sick game. Wants us to keep crying out for help. It likes it. We can't stop or else no one else will come. We'd be trapped forever. Trapped where? I asked, my own eyes growing wide as a sharp chill pricked its way down my back. He pointed toward the station again. I looked again into the dark mass in the doorway. God, Reggie's in there. In there. Between our world and its. It's from another world, you see. It's here to pull in new prey, constantly rotating, torturing new victims in a never-ending cycle by twisting and pulling them apart to force them to cry out for help through the broadcast. I started to go for the doorway. Hey, what you doing? My friend's in there. I have to get him out. Oh, wait, he shouted, grabbing my arm. You can't. If you go in there, you'll be trapped. Well, I can't just sit here and do... I stopped when I heard the radio starting to fade into static. The broadcast was ending, and sure enough, the station was fading along with it. I jerked my arm free and sprinted, hurling myself into the doorway. It was when I landed face down into the concrete, however, that I realized I was too late. The station was too far faded, going back to whatever world or dimension it had come from. Reggie, I cried. Reggie! He's gone, man. He's trapped in between, with it. Well, I shot up and immediately rushed the man, snatching him by his worn-out shirt collar. What? How do I get him back? I was seeing red. I had half a mind to throw him to the ground and stomp him down, right there in the dirt. How do I make him come back? You can't, he stammered, frightened. You have to wait till he broadcasts the signal again. When? He shrugged. I don't know. Honest. Depends on how long it makes him suffer before he breaks and tries to cry for help. I looked over to see the now empty space and released him. He scurried away like a mouse in the direction closest to the town, while I stayed behind. And that brings me to now. I haven't heard the broadcast or seen the station appear again, but I know it will. And when it does, I know I'll hear Reggie crying out for mercy in that distorted voice, just like the man was. I don't want to do it, but I know I have to. I have to go in and free him. And that's why I'm writing this, as a warning. What this thing is, I don't know. And I'm afraid for when I have to find out. But at the same time, it's my fault Reggie's trapped. And I can't just go on while he's trapped there, in between worlds. And so, I'm begging you now. Don't come looking for me, please. If you hear the broadcast or find the radio station 66.69 Future FM, for the love of God, ignore it. God knows I wish I did now. So I don't know if you've been able to tell this week, but I've had a bit of a summer cold. Not COVID this time, just
well, a little bit under the weather. Anyway, my nose has been really bunged up and my voice has been like this. And I've been doing my best to try and hide it and work my way through it. So I really hope it hasn't, influenced your enjoyment of the stories, the last 3, 4, 5 videos. Because this has been really lingering and it's hard to get past it. But doing my best, and I hope that the videos have been of sufficient quality to keep you all entertained and satisfied. Oh, that's the end of that. What day is it? It's Friday already. My God, another week has passed. Coming up to the end of May and entering June. Busy as ever. More stories coming, so hope you're going to stick with me during the summer. Well, till next time, my dear friends. Very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.